I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping as normal. I've not got any slides to go through, so we won't worry about that. Just as normal, this event is being recorded, so do bear in mind that your name obviously comes up on the screen, and the chat will be saved as well, so anything that you put up will obviously be saved. It will go up as usual onto our YouTube channel, which is Hemel Property TV, and a link will go out for that on social media and on direct marketing as well. So as the normal format, I'll hand over to Vik in a moment, but if you can leave your questions to the end or pop them in the chat box, and then we can go through those at the end rather than being in a position where we're just sort of all talking over each other. That would be really helpful. So that's it from me. I'm now going to hand over to Vik for his presentation from the National Residential Landlords Association.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everybody. As Julie said, my name is Vik Daws. I'm an area rep for the NRLA, as we are now, covering the southeast region, but more specifically Bucks, Beds and Hertfordshire as well. To those of you who may or may not be familiar with the NRLA, we're actually now an accumulation of two organisations, what was formerly known as the NLA and the RLA. So that creative new name, the NRLA, was formed and launched on the 1st of April. So as I normally do at these types of meetings, I run through a news update and an update of legislation. There's been a lot happening before, during and since lockdown. So I'm just going to try and share my screen with you so that I can put the presentation up. It's that one there. Okay. There we go. Hopefully we can all see that. Good, excellent, marvelous. Well, here we go then. So what are we going to just cover for you this morning? We're just going to briefly review the Chancellor's summer statement, Plan for Jobs, as it was called, and how that particularly might impact the PRS. Some new legislation which has just come in, which as landlords you should all now be familiar with, and that's the compulsory 5-year electrical installation safety checks. There was a lot of confusion when the government guidance came out about timelines on that, so I'll just clarify that for you as well. A couple of very recent news items, an update on gas safety certificates and the impact on Section 21 notices. This week, in fact, I think it is the no DSS ruling, which is deemed unlawful to market property specifically against DSS tenants. We've got some news for you on how the NRLA is helping our members deal with the coronavirus situation. So there's some tips and hints on possession changes and our campaign that we're running, guidance on managing rent arrears, some specific coronavirus advice, and the wider impact on legislation and policy. And then finally, whilst it may be old news, the Tenant Fee Act is now fully in place as of April this year. So I'll just remind you all of the salient points as far as that's concerned as well. So moving swiftly on, our mate Rishi's recent announcement, a plan for jobs, specifically relating to stamp duty. So as you may be aware from the statement, there's a temporary increase in stamp duty exemption threshold in England and Northern Ireland. So that effectively means that no stamp duty payable on property prices up to £500,000 where the property is to be your main home. It's effective immediate until the 31st of March 2021. However, unfortunately, the 3% surcharge for additional property remains, but for properties under £500,000, the landlords will only actually pay the 3% stamp duty as opposed to the additional that they would have previously had to pay. Just a little summary there on that table of what that means in real terms. So anybody purchasing a property to rent up to £500,000, there's a 3% stamp duty. The next 425,000 at 8%. And if you're really feeling adventurous and buying properties above that level, then the next £500,000, 575,000 at 13%, and the rest above 1.5 million at 15%. The government has also announced, as part of Rishi's statement, a 2 billion Green Homes grant scheme, which comes into place from September of this year. So what that effectively does is it entitles homeowners, including landlords, to a voucher for 2/3 of the cost of energy efficiency measures up to a total price or value of £5,000. Low-income households will also qualify for actually 100% of the costs up to £10,000. We are seeking some clarification from the government about whether there'll be restrictions for F and G rated properties, and also whether tenants in the PRS will be eligible for full grants, because that wasn't included in the statement. So we will update as soon as we get some responses there. How is this effectively going to work? Well, it's a voucher scheme, and it's going to be launched through local accredited installers. It's an online application process. Once you've submitted your application online, it goes out to tender from all the local suppliers that are accredited on the scheme. They will provide quotes, and when the work is approved, the voucher is then issued. It's part of the government's aim towards working towards their target of net zero carbon emissions as well. Areas where this grant is particularly aimed at is for improvements such as loft and floor insulation, new energy efficiency boilers, heat pumps, energy efficient lighting, double tripping glazed windows, and energy efficient doors. So moving on to the employment side of things, again, as you may be aware, part of the job retention scheme is a bonus of £1,000 per employees, where employers keep staff on after furlough and where the staff are still employed in January of next year. There's further incentives for employers to create jobs for 16 to 24-year-olds, because those in that bracket and on universal credit will actually, government will fund 100% of the national minimum wage for 25 hours per week, with the employers able to actually top up as well. Additional resources will be provided to the DWP to provide extra staff to help people into the workplace. And also some big news, a temporary cut to VAT for tourism and hospitality services as well for 6 months from the 15th of July. Now, moving on to a bit of legislation that's come in. So this is where there was a bit of confusion actually. So effectively from the 1st of July of this year, for all new tenancies granted from the 1st of June, and for existing tenancies from the 1st of April next year, there is a requirement for a compulsory 5-year electrical installation safety check. The legislation actually came in from the 1st of June, and the government guidance didn't come in until the 1st of June either. But unfortunately, it was badly worded and misinterpreted, because initially it read as though the legislation came in for the 1st of June for new tenancies starting from the 1st of July and existing ones from the 1st of April next year. But actually, the government meant to say, as it has been clarified here, that it came in from the 1st of June for tenancies from the 1st of June, but landlords had until the 1st of July to carry out the checks on those properties. Hopefully that's clear, but if you've got some questions, do come back on me on that at the end. So inspection of electrical installation must be carried out every 5 years. Existing tenants must be given a copy of the report within 28 days, and new tenants before the tenancy begins. This new legislation and the certificates don't form part of the prescribed information, but it's probably good practice to include these certificates as part of your prescribed information and documentation that you provide to tenants at the outset of a new tenancy, just to avoid getting yourself into any hot water at a later point through an admin error, etc. The penalties are fairly hefty. Penalties of up to 30,000 per breach if landlords fail to comply. Now, when these reports are produced, firstly, strongly recommend that you source an electrician that's registered with one of the organisations such as NAPIT or NIC, EIC. With the reports, you will basically get a final satisfactory or unsatisfactory decision. There are three categories of areas or fail potentially that could be classified. The most serious one is classified as a C1, which effectively means that there is danger present and a risk of injury likely and immediate action required, which will also result in a fail. You have the category C2, which basically implies that there are potentially dangerous and there is a potential danger and remedial action is needed urgently, which needs to be completed in 28 days. And the original inspector will need to certify that the works have been completed once done. Again, that would fall under a fail category or an unsatisfactory category. And the last one is a C3, which is improvements recommended, not necessary or legislatively required. And that would actually be a pass or a satisfactory report with the improvements recommended just for information purposes. Just for your information, there is actually a free app available from a charity called Electrical Safety First, called Home Safety Check, which will actually enable landlords to sort of carry out their own pre-testing pro forma, if you like. But the sort of things that you need to be looking for as a landlord is sort of broken accessories such as sockets and light switches, signs of scorching around sockets due to overloading, overheating of electrical equipment such as lamp holders fitted the wrong lamps, usually detected by a strong, often fish-like smell, damaged cables to portable electrical appliances or trailing cables and flexes. And also lack of RCD protection for circuits, particularly those supplying equipment in baths and shower rooms, or the garden is also considered a high-risk area, so pay attention to those as well. So moving on to a change of, not a change of legislation, but some of you may be familiar with a historic case and ruling called the Monty Schultz case, which is where the tenant took the landlord to court on the basis that the Section 21 notice had been issued incorrectly or wasn't valid due to the fact that the landlord hadn't issued a gas safety certificate or a valid gas safety certificate before the tenancy started. This has been the subject of a long-standing appeal, and the Court of Appeal has finally ruled that Section 21 notices are still valid if the original gas certificate was issued before the notice is served. A lot of landlords were concerned because whilst they had valid gas safety certificates, due to an admin error on their part, they just failed to serve it before the tenancy started, and the original ruling deemed that therefore the Section 21 was invalid. So this has overturned that ruling. That said, there obviously must still be a valid gas safety certificate before the tenant moves in. But as I said, the admin failure to issue this before moving in can now be rectified without affecting a future Section 21. Now, it's important also and we're seeking clarification because one of the things the court ruling didn't confirm was on the implications if a valid gas safety certificate doesn't exist at the beginning of the tenancy. So we're still awaiting some further clarification of that as well. So watch this space, but the key to it is make sure your gas safety certificate is always valid at all times and that your tenants do have a copy. Some new ruling that's just come in this week, no DSS blanket ban ruled unlawful. So again, this probably goes back to early last year where a potential tenant in receipt of benefits was turned down by a letting agent due to the fact that she was in receipt of benefits, and she decided to take the agent to court. And as a result, the court case is now completed, and the ruling found that a no DSS policy of the letting agent was discriminatory, in that it unlawfully discriminated on the grounds of sex and disability and contravened the Equality Act of 2010. So going forward, that effectively means that landlords must not have blanket policies which discriminate against benefit claimants. And landlords should really be looking to consider each tenant's circumstances on a case-by-case basis. I think with the development of the universal credit system, there are now a lot more people within the benefit system than perhaps there would have been previously. So there's a wider sector of potential tenants that now impacts. And I think some of the portals have already taken steps to avoid agents or landlords marketing properties with such bans in terms of the potential tenants they will consider. So moving on the impacts of the coronavirus, as you will be aware, there has been a blanket ban on possession proceedings. However, the government has finally announced that the stay on possession proceedings has been extended for a further 2 months until the 23rd of August, which means that landlords can still issue possession notices but can't enforce them until the courts open their doors again. The NRLA is sitting on the judicial working group looking at how possession can restart. We are constantly campaigning, and more specifically with the COVID-19 situation, the NRLA is calling for the government to make a clear statement reiterating that those who can pay their rent should do so. Unfortunately, the wording at the outset was a little unfortunate in the use of rent holidays or payment holidays, because as a letting agent myself, I suddenly found myself getting a few calls from tenants saying, I think I'll take my holiday starting from next month. But they weren't aware of the fact that a rent holiday doesn't absolve them from actually having to pay the rent. It just accrues for them to have to pay at a later point. So suddenly, from having quite a few deciding they were going to take a holiday, fortunately I ended up only in the end actually having 2 tenants that for legitimate reasons weren't able to pay their rent. So I think the confusion was, in most minds, tenants' minds, a holiday meant they were let off the payment. But that was not the case, and we're asking the government to clarify that and emphasise it really. We're asking for further support for tenants to pay rent through the government-backed loans, increasing the LHA to 50th percentile, and also some universal credit reforms. We're asking for government to consider compensation to landlords who have existing possession orders from the county court that they haven't been able to execute, and as a result lost quite a lot of rent. Prioritisation when the courts reopen for ASB domestic abuse cases that were begun before the pause, and also for rent arrears that accrued before lockdown as well. Also, with the lockdown and the closing of the courts, we're looking for clear plans to ensure that the court process legitimate possession claims more swiftly. So what can you do? Well, we're asking NRLA members or non-members alike basically to support our campaigns by writing to your MP or speaking to them at local surgeries, or asking them to write on your behalf to the Secretaries of State for Housing and Justice in support of our campaign. It's important for us and our campaign that we get the support of our members and landlords alike. And where you have specifically had an experience, it's important to give your own experiences and how the changes have impacted you and your business. There's some links there which can be found on the NRLA website as well to help you voice your concerns. So, coronavirus advice for landlords. As an NLA or RLA member previously, you will find extensive online guidance on both websites. We're hoping that we will have in place a combined website, a new NRLA website, by the beginning of next month. But watch this space, as technology never guarantees that. But there's a lot of advice on there for you to help minimize health risks, understand the changes to possession rules, how to obtain financial support, and how to manage your property ongoing through this crisis. We've been very active in running weekly webinars on Wednesdays. So again, as a member or even a non-member, you can register for those webinars. They are recorded, and recordings are available on the websites. And they cover a range of issues such as financial issues, property management, tenancy management, and possession proceedings as well. So going on to guidance and more specifically managing rent arrears, for example, we're working together with sector partners, and we've released guidance to support landlords and tenants to manage rent arrears during this coronavirus outbreak. Includes advice on early communication, because I think early communication is key. Burying your head in the sand and hoping it goes away isn't going to work, I'm afraid. Early advice on early communication, how to agree rent deferrals, reductions and suspensions, advice to provide support for tenants on applying for benefits, and signposts to resources to help budget planning as well. They're all available free on our websites. Changes to possession, you will, again, should be aware that all new possession notice periods extended to 3 months from the usual 2 months until at least the end of September 2020. Now that actually includes Section 21 and Section 8 notices, regardless of the timescales that were previously in place. The government, as we said, has confirmed the courts will be reopening on the 24th of August. NRLA is sitting on the Judicial Committee working group looking at how the courts will manage the cases. And we're also engaging with the government on both pre-action protocol and prioritisation of possession cases. Personally, I think that the courts were already overstretched prior to lockdown. Lockdown won't have helped with their closure. And I think landlords are going to be in a very tricky situation. And personally, I don't think that if you're a landlord looking to gain possession of your property, you're going to get possession this side of Christmas, if I'm honest. But let's see what we can come up with together with the government to hopefully smooth that process through. How has this impacted other policies? Well, again, the Renters Reform Bill was due to include the abolition of Section 21. That was the big news before lockdown. This is obviously being put on the back burner for now, so it's unlikely this will get a hearing now again until probably next year. Equally, the reform of Section 8 and also the government's plan to introduce lifetime deposits. The response to selective licensing review is going to be delayed, and the government also recommends delays to new discretionary license schemes. The government, however, is still implementing, or has implemented, as we know, the electrical installation safety regulations, the Grenfell response and remediation of unsafe cladding, and surprise, surprise, the Section 24 changes even continue to bite landlords financially. Review of the health and safety, and also some local authorities still able to implement new discretionary licensing schemes, such as in Coventry. Finally, just a reminder of the Tenant Fee Act, which came in on the 1st of June 2019. And there was a transition period up to the 1st of June 2020. So where we are now is any tenancies, ASTs, student tenancies or licenses to occupy apart from holiday lets signed since the 1st of June 2019 must now comply with the ban. For tenancies signed before the 1st of June 2019, there was a 1-year transition period. As I said, that came to an end the 1st of June 2020. So any fees chargeable on tenancies signed before the 1st of June 2019 could still be charged for the pre-existing tenancies until the end of May this year. So from the 1st of June, if you had a pre-1st of June 2019 tenancy, any fees written into that contract are no longer chargeable after the 1st of June 2020. And to do so would be considered an illegal payment. So afterwards, as I said, there we go. Afterwards, even if the tenancy agreement includes fees, you will not be able to charge them. One thing that doesn't apply to is deposits. So if you did sign a new tenancy before the 1st of June 2019 and took the deposit at the higher rate, as long as that tenancy is continuing either on a fixed term basis or on a rolling basis, you can retain the original deposit amount and don't need to pay back the additional amount to the tenant unless you enter into a new fixed term tenancy with the same tenant, or obviously a new tenant. Where we are with fees and what you can and can't do, well, there's not a lot you can do. You're very lucky you can still charge for rent and utilities. For rent arrears, you can now charge a maximum up to 3% APR above Bank of England base rate. No admin fees can be chargeable. Holding deposit is now limited to 1 week's rent, held for up to 14 days, and you must be quite clear when taking that holding deposit with tenants to remind them the circumstances under which that is not refundable, if indeed it isn't. Replacement of a tenant mid-tenancy, you can charge usually up to £50. Again, just a note that all these fees must include VAT, if VAT is applicable as well. Lost keys or security devices, again at cost, is all you can charge for the cost of changing the lock or providing new keys, and this must be evidenced by receipts or invoices. So again, no admin fees or charge for your time can be included in those. Security deposits, now limited to 5 weeks rent or 6 weeks if the annual rent exceeds 50,000. And finally, where there's a surrender of the tenancy, you can charge the remainder of the rent under the contract until or unless a new tenant is found to replace the outgoing tenant. I think I've run through that fairly quickly for you, and I think we're done there. So I am able to take questions if you've got any.
Fabulous, thanks very much for that, Vic. And while you were talking, I did actually just download that electrical safety app. It's actually really good.
It is, yes. Yes, I've had a couple of positive comments on it, and it's a useful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to make sure more people learn about that, because I didn't even know about that, so I've learned something today.
Where did you find it, Julie, so that we can go and look for it?
I've got an Apple iPhone, and I just went into my iPhone store, my app store, and just put in electrical safety first, and it just popped up as the first app.
Any more for any more?
Anybody got any questions for Vic? We're all very quiet this morning.
Brain's gone. I did have something and I didn't write it down, so I can't remember what it was.
Well, I think Julie's got my contact details anyway, so if anybody does remember some questions or queries post this webinar, then just send them along to Julie and she can send them on to me, or she can let you have my details, whichever really.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I'm just gonna have a quick one with you there, Vic. I've just seen on the National Residential Landlords Association website, they've just put a breaking news that the government have said that when the courts reopen, there will be a prioritising system, and that anyone that was served notice prior to lockdown and it happened to be linked to antisocial behaviour will be prioritised for eviction. So that's quite nice to hear, that there's been a little bit of common sense running through the government.
Yeah, I think it's very useful when organisations like us can get onto working groups and committees with the government at the outset, because if we can help discuss policies as they're developing them, then I think we have a greater chance of coming out with something half sensible. Unfortunately, once the government have made a policy decision, going back to them on it and trying to get them to change their mind is a lot trickier, because as we know, politicians don't like to admit to being wrong. So it's always more difficult at the back end than it is at the front end.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just nice to see that they do tend to be listening a bit more now.
Do you have any ideas when we might next have actual meetings or going forward? I know it's still early days yet.
Physical meetings?
Yes.
I am in talks with the venue about doing this, so it's possible that we could do it from next month or September.
Yeah, I think also at the NRLA, it's an interesting subject, because whilst during this crisis we have continued to interact with members through technology-based systems like Zoom and Teams and GoWebinar, etc. There isn't really a substitute for a face-to-face meeting, so we're keen. I think going forward, as with a lot of businesses, we will probably retain an element of technological-based meetings and interaction with members, but I do think that we will certainly be looking to go back to physical meetings as soon as possible. I think at the moment we're probably on our usual summer break coming up with the month of August. So I think by the end of August, beginning of September, we're hoping, depending on what happens in the interim, to have some sort of announcement on when we might be looking to start our meetings as well, and perhaps looking to start them in October, November time, if that's makes sense.
A quick question, because I don't think I've seen anything in the post. Have there still been the magazines being sent out, or have they been stopped? I can't remember.
No, I think it's all been, because of, again, the crisis. We couldn't, the publishers, etc., were all closed down. So I think everything that we've continued to produce has been online. So we've been very interactive with news updates, email updates, webinars, etc., to try and keep everybody on top of stuff. And I think also that's probably helped, because I think the publications are all well and good, but with the fast pace of changing legislation, etc., at the moment, electronic
out of date before you've published them, don't they?
Exactly right. Yeah. So is that everybody's happy with the new electrical installation safety requirements, etc.? Nobody's got any questions on that at all? No? Good. Marvellous stuff.
Okay. Well, if no one's got any further questions, then I shall bring this meeting to a close. Thanks very much for your time today, Vic. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And obviously we've got some more dates booked in with you further into the year, so I'll make those announcements closer to the time for you. And like I say, if anyone wants any questions put to Vic, just let me know. I've got all of his contact details and I can make sure that they get directly to him. So it just leaves me to thank everybody for attending today. I really appreciate it. It's been a beautiful day out there, and I thought everyone was going to be sitting in the garden instead. But thanks very much, everybody. And this will be up on the YouTube channel as soon as I've mastered the modern technology behind it. So probably tomorrow or Sunday. All right. Thanks very much, guys. I'm going to end the meeting.
And thank you very much, Julie, for organising it. Thank you, Julie. Bye-bye.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.